I'm joined now by the current head of FEMA, Deanne Criswell. Madam Administrator, it's great to have you. First, I just want to give you an opportunity to tell us what you think people need to know about how FEMA is preparing and prepared to deal with Hurricane Milton.
Yeah, Chris, I just landed on the ground here in Tallahassee, and I'm at the State Emergency Operations Center. I just got a very quick update from my team. I think the biggest thing that I learned is we had last night over 30,000 people that were being reported in shelters, and they expect that number to be even higher, maybe close to 50,000 in shelters tonight, which means people listened. People listened to the warnings and they evacuated, and so that's really good news. But we know that Hurricane Milton just made landfall, and even though it shifted a little bit, many of these communities that were preparing for the worst still aren't out of the woods. And so the time to evacuate is probably gone for the majority of Florida right now. So you need to make sure that you're continuing to listen to your local officials and doing everything you can to protect yourself and your family. Maybe charge some of those phones up right now so you can continue to have communication if and when the power does go out. But again, doing what you can to stay safe until this storm passes.
I want to just put up a tweet from the official account of FEMA talking about the responders you have on the ground, 1,000 supporting folks in Florida, 1,400 search and rescue personnel, incident management teams, ambulances, helicopters, high water vehicles. Tell me how things are going in Western North Carolina, which I think has been sort of off the charts in terms of the combination of the scale of destruction, the amount of water those places took, and the terrain making it difficult to just get to people with roads utterly washed out.
Yeah, Chris, I mean, what we saw in Western North Carolina is very different than what we see here along the coast of Florida. You know, when you look at the coast of Florida, you can anticipate where the storm surge is going to be and really have a good idea of where the destruction is going to be. When you look at Appalachia, we're talking about how much rain is falling, the rate of the rainfall, and exactly where it falls. You know, in those valleys, in those hollers can create those deadly immediate flash floods where people have little warning. And that's, you know, the worst case scenario that we saw move across Western North Carolina almost 2 weeks ago now. And so it washed out roads, it took out communications, it washed out and damaged the water infrastructure, took down power. But I was able to meet with the governor again today. I've been with him most days, and he gave an update today, and there's progress, a lot of progress. Most communities have good access. Some still have limited access, which means a footbridge or ATVs, but the power's being restored, water's being restored. But there's definitely areas that have had the most impact, that it's still going to take some time before we get those critical lifelines, those critical pieces of infrastructure back up and running.
On the FEMA website, there's a hurricane rumor response, and it talks about some of the rumors that circulate. One of them that the governor's own press spokesperson tried to push back on, rumor FEMA's blockading people in Florida, preventing evacuations. This is false. How much does the information environment matter for the kind of work you do in emergency response?
Well, it matters tremendously, right? Because they're deliberately trying to create distrust. And when you create that level of distrust, it just makes it harder to get the services and the support that these people that have either are going to experience, like we're seeing with Milton, or have experienced across all of the other states from Hurricane Helene, makes it harder for them to get the resources that they need and they deserve. And so we have to make sure that we are using trusted messengers within the community to try to combat this information. And so they don't feel like they can't reach out to their government agencies, whether it's FEMA, whether it's state or local, that they are getting into the system and we can help them. But it's also demoralizing for our own staff who have left their own families to come here and do what they know that they need to do. And that's to help the people that have been impacted by these storms.
Final question for you, an important one quickly. Do you have the resources? Is there the line item budget in the account that FEMA draws from to do what you need to do in the aftermath of Milton on the heels of Helene?
There is the money in my budget, the Disaster Relief Fund, to continue the response efforts for Hurricane Helene and Milton. But we're going to have to assess how much it's going to put a drain on that to determine how much of my recovery projects I can continue to do across the nation. So I always have enough left to be able to respond to another storm, because we're not out of hurricane season yet.
All right, FEMA Administrator Deanne Criswell, thank you on a very, very busy night for taking some time with us. I really do appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Chris.
Good luck tonight. I'm joined now by NBC News correspondent Sam Brock, live from Fort Myers, Florida. Sam, how are things looking there?
Sure. So you hear Fort Myers, Chris, and no doubt people immediately go back to Hurricane Ian a couple of years ago and the utter devastation that was inflicted there. Fort Myers proper, where we are, which is right near the Caloosahatchee River over my shoulder, it's about 10 miles away from the Barrier Islands that are just sitting out there, jutting out of the middle of the Gulf of Mexico, Chris. And truly, when you talk about the most vulnerable residents in all this, that's who we're talking about. Fort Myers Beach, Sanibel Island, Pine Island. If that sounds very familiar, that's because those were the towns that were literally cut off a couple of years ago. And so it's with that in mind that officials here have been evacuating folks in Lee County, where I am right now. There's 800,000 people in this county. For context, 416,000 of them under mandatory evacuation. From all appearances, Chris, a lot of folks were heeding the warning, because we do know that Lee County officials said earlier today they went from 1,600 people in shelters all the way up to almost 7,000 by this afternoon. So you can only hope that many people that were in harm's way have moved out of it. A couple of notes right now. It's been tropical storm force winds for a period of time. Has died down a little bit, but about a half dozen or so local governments recently confirmed in the last hour and a half, they are no longer sending emergency responders to rescue people because the sustained winds where they are, and I'm talking about places like Sarasota, where the eye wall appears to be going over right now, and Charlotte County and Manatee County, the city of Sarasota, we mentioned Pinellas County, all of them tell us they're not doing that anymore because they've reached the 45-mile-an-hour wind threshold. Something for folks to keep in mind, but also the storm surge. I mean, Naples right now is in a major flood stage, according to our weather experts, our weather unit. They say it's approaching 5 feet of storm surge there. And high tide tomorrow, Chris, is at like 8 o'clock in the morning, right? So we're only just starting to get there. Fort Myers Beach as well. There's some images coming in showing that water rising near Times Square, which was sort of the heartbeat of the area that just got absolutely decimated. You could see the water starting to reach the businesses that are coastal that were literally just rebuilt, right? And so many of these people as well, residents, just a couple of weeks ago, because of Hurricane Helene, had to go through 6 feet of storm surge, which is less than the projection here, 8 to 12, and found themselves in a scenario where water was still flooding their homes, sewage was getting in their houses. Some of them saying we're going to have to go through this process all over again. So I'm trying to keep that in the back of my mind. As we're also talking to first responders, we had the Charlotte County Sheriff on Top Story about 10 or 15 minutes ago, talking about how the fact that he's not aware of any search and rescues right now, but he has all these resources ready to go. We know that internet connectivity is going to be an issue. You're going to hear many, many reports of folks with missing loved ones, and they're going to try to pin that down in the days to come. But you just hope, when you hear about Governor DeSantis discussing 150 shelters across the state and the capacity for 200,000 people, my colleague Marissa Parra recently reporting there was about 100,000 or so that had actually filled up spots there, many of them tailored to people with special needs or pets. Maybe the state is really providing a comprehensive opportunity here and really sort of a new playbook, given what we've seen with Helene, to address crises like this, because make no mistake about it, a crisis is unfolding. I don't know what we're going to see tomorrow morning. Right now, not distraction on the ground where I am. It's been probably 30 or 40-mile-an-hour winds. And now, actually, as I look over my shoulder for the first time, I'm seeing what appears to be a couple of feet of water in the street next to the parking garage where I am. This is new, because that was not the case as of about 20 or 30 minutes ago. So the storm surge I was just describing is starting to make its way in, and I would not be surprised, Chris, if you're looking at a scenario tomorrow where there are feet of storm surge in the early morning hours. But we're going to definitely keep you updated on that as the situation continues to develop.
But elections, I think, are won on vibes, because one of the old saws is they just want somebody they can have a beer with. So would you like to have a beer with me so I can tell people what that's like? Okay. This was... Now, we asked ahead of time, because I can't just be giving a drink to the Vice President of the United States without asking. You asked for Miller High Life. You rather Miller High Life. I'm just curious.
Okay, the last time time I had beer was at a baseball game with Doug.
Okay, so cheers. There
cheers.
You go. There you go.
That was Vice President Kamala Harris last night having a beer on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert, wrapping up her 48-hour media blitz where she appeared on a variety of traditional and non-traditional outlets, from the Call Her Daddy podcast to Howard Stern, The View, and 60 Minutes. Those appearances seem to have gotten under the skin of her opponent, Donald Trump, who dropped out of his 60 Minutes interview. He posted a long rant this morning, so outraged that Harris' interview was supposedly sliced and diced, that he's now adding CBS to the long list of entities that he has grievances against, and claims that he will investigate should he get a second term. This includes ABC News for daring to fact-check him during last month's debate, and Google for only showing the bad stories about him. In the meantime, some of Trump's former employees and fellow Republicans are in Pennsylvania right now. Former Congresswoman Liz Cheney, along with Sarah Matthews, Cassidy Hutchinson, and Alyssa Farah Griffin, all of whom worked for Trump and his administration, are hosting an event in the Philadelphia suburbs making the case against their former boss. Joining me now to discuss is Jonathan Allen, NBC News senior national politics reporter, Maria Teresa Kumar, president and CEO of Voto Latino and an MSNBC contributor, and Rick Tyler, Republican strategist and MSNBC political analyst. So excited to have all of you at the table today. So I'll start with this, because I think for people who don't pay attention to politics, right, they're listening to podcasts. They're listening to Howard Stern. They care about things like what's happening with Stephen Colbert. Rick, I'll start with you. How effective do you think it is for the Harris campaign to have done all of this in 48 hours, right? Like, this wasn't spread out through the week. It was a massive, massive blitz at the beginning of this week to get to all these sort of non-traditional outlets.
Look, I think it's enormously effective because you go to where the people are, you hunt where ducks are, and these are where the people are. The media will complain, and I'll complain about the media a little bit here. They'll complain that she's not going on the substantive hard news, answering the hard questions. But as a political operative, I'm not putting my people out in front of the hard news, in the last days of the campaign to mess it up. People have an instinctive nature about candidates, whether they like them or not. And when you have a beer with Stephen Colbert, it's a fairly likable moment. So I think it's very smart, and I do think it's very effective. The other thing the media likes to do is they like to do these debates, and then they say at the end of the debate, there was no substance. Well, I'm sorry, you can't give a substantive answer in 2 minutes with 1 minute responses.
Right.
If you want a substantive debate, have a Lincoln Douglas debate and let them talk for 2 hours. But no, that won't get ratings. So the media, I'm sorry, you can't have it both ways.
I totally understand. Look, I say when people want policy substance, there's a website for that. You can find out that information if you actually care about it. Maria, this is the other thing that strikes me about these sort of soft interviews, et cetera, et cetera. I remember in 2012, one of the most important surveys and polls that I saw was asking the question whether you would have Barack Obama or Mitt Romney babysit your kids. Which one do you think would be more likely to stop their car and help you if you had a flat tire? And which one would you rather go on a road trip with? And believe it or not, Obama only won 2 out of the 3.
Which one did he lose?
Believe it or not, people actually thought that Romney would be slightly better babysitting.
Wait. Barack Obama rode around in a choom wagon.
Look,
Sorry,
in high school. This is like I want to go on the road trip with him.
I thought so as well.
He's not a good babysitter.
I remember
They hadn't heard about the dog, right? Strapped to the roof of the car.
That had not come out yet.
Okay,
that was part of the
got
October surprise. So what do you think the voters, or the supposedly skeptical voters that we still have of Harris, what did they get from her drinking a beer, right? Because to me, most of these questions have already been answered, but there are still people who apparently are affected by this. What do you think they're picking up from these last interviews?
They're the low information voter who's not turning into the mainstream media talking about these really tough interviews. The people who are watching the main tough interviews, they've already decided. What she is trying to do is say, yes, I'm drinking a beer. And by the way, don't forget that I'm going to lower your cost of health care. Don't forget that you're drinking that piece of beer and I'm giving you a $6,000 tax credit for your first kid. I'm drinking that beer. And it's her way of weaving in her policies to folks that are not tuning in, because sometimes a lot of these folks are saying, you know what, politics is getting a little too icky. Right. So she's going where they are and weaving in policy and making her likable and making her authentic.
And she's drinking a union beer.
Right.
Look, there's one thing that Kamala Harris has nailed. She knows exactly who she's talking to, and she needs to win back voters that the Democrats lost to Trump. And you see them. You see them in the rural areas, and their signs are out. People who don't have two nickels to rub together. A lot of people they lost the working class voter. She needs to win white working class men, and that is who she's talking to. And she needs to win them in.
But she's also growing. So she has two folks, right? The white working class voter, yes, but she also needs to grow the youth vote.
Right.
Because it's the youth vote that overcompensates for the folks that are saying, I'm not quite sure. And I would actually say that she's the chunk of the independent white voters she has already won. Her job right now is to focus on growing that youth voter that still isn't sure if her policies are going to be for her or them.
So, Jonathan, that's what I was thinking of. When I hear that there's a slew of Republicans in suburban Pennsylvania, right? So suburban Philadelphia, that's fine. These are all your nice people. They're going to go home. They're going to watch this. They watch The View. They like Abbott Elementary. That's fine, right? But I agree with Rick. I agree with Marisa. The real question is working class white guys who are uncomfortable with voting for a black woman to be president of the United States. Is this kind of media blitz talking to them? Because it doesn't seem like any of these shows that she's been on the last 48 hours are speaking to that group.
Well, look,
Sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I apologize. I'm sorry.
I need to apologize. Well, first of all, I just want to say drinking a Miller High Life is an implicit contrast because obviously she's trying to suggest to people that Trump is a low life, right? Which is
that's pretty good. That's deep. That's a multi-level chess there. That's a multi-level chess. Okay.
But in terms of look, if you're talking about working class white guys who don't want a black woman president, she's not going to reach them.
Right.
But if you're talking about people who are open and in that demographic, then I think that matters a lot. Mm-hmm. Is this somebody who relates to me?
She is currently advertising on talk radio in Pennsylvania.
Right.
You know, right-wing talk radio, Sean Hannity, and she's advertising on those things. That's very significant. Democrats don't usually do that.
Right, but I also think that folks are trying to find a permission structure. So by her going there, she's giving men and she's giving young people a permission structure of actually trying to break those norms. We just came out of the field with a poll, and one of the things that we found was that young Latino men in places like Pennsylvania and Texas were holding on to conservative values. And when we dug in deeper, it was more of like, well, can she really balance the checkbook? And then we were like, but your mother balances the checkbook, right? And so it's how do you actually create permission structures for them to be open to the fact that her gender might be impeding her when she has actually been able to demonstrate that she knows how to do the job.
And getting on talk radio, getting on conservative talk radio, getting on radio often listened to across long rural stretches of Pennsylvania. Yeah. The Democrats have been trying to solve for a long time the margin of their losses in rural areas, right? Like she's not going to win all those big counties.
You just don't want to get blown out.
But she wants to change that margin.
Counts a big deal.
Exactly.
It's a big deal.
Exactly.
And this is what campaign strategists often forget. Well, we're going to lose that counter. We'll just not pay attention. Yeah. No. The votes you get out of the counter are just as important as the ones you win.
That's right.
Because they add up to the whole.
And the problem that they have is they keep making efficiency decisions. Yeah. Right. So the efficiency decision is always going to be let's put our ad in Philadelphia. Let's make sure that the candidate goes to Philadelphia because there are more people.
As well.
But they're totally oversaturated. No, to your point. And sometimes you got to go out. And if you go out in one rural area, this is a Bill Clinton thing that I think really matters now. If you go out in one rural area, not only are you going to get the attention from that local media, but people in nearby towns are also going to hear that you're there, and they're going to go, okay, this is somebody, I might not even agree with them, but this is somebody who cares enough to show up.
To come out to my neighborhood.
Exactly.
At a briefing today, President Joe Biden blamed Donald Trump for the disinformation that is swirling and coming from the right in the wake of Hurricane Helene and as millions are in the path of this hurricane, Hurricane Milton. Watch.
For the last few weeks, there's been a reckless, irresponsible, and relentless promotion of disinformation and outright lies that are disturbing people. It's undermining confidence in the incredible rescue and recovery work that has already been taken and will continue to be taken. And it's harmful to those who need help the most. There is simply no place for this to happen. Former President Trump has led the onslaught of lies. Now the claims are getting even more bizarre. Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, a congresswoman from Georgia, is now saying the federal government is literally controlling the weather. We're controlling the weather. It's beyond ridiculous. It's got to stop. Moments like this, there are no red or blue states. There's one United States of America, where neighbors are helping neighbors. Volunteers and first responders are risking everything, including their own lives, to help their fellow Americans.
Joining us now is United States Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg. Mr. Secretary, it's great to see you.
Good to be with you. Thanks for having me.
I want to get to your personal fight against disinformation with one of its biggest purveyors in a second, but I first wonder if you can just share with our viewers what the Department of Transportation is doing to prepare for and protect folks in the path of this hurricane in Florida, Hurricane Milton.
Well, we've got folks positioned now, and that's everywhere from FAA to Federal Highway Administration, ready as soon as it's possible to get into the affected area afterwards to help. We've been engaging up until now to support things like evacuation, making sure that the shoulder lanes are in use on I-4 and I-75, to take one example, doing anticipatory approvals for drone flights that wouldn't normally yet be licensed, but are going to help Florida utilities, for example, survey the damage that may be happening. So whether we're talking about sea, air, or land, we're doing everything we can to help make sure that Florida is well positioned to recover. I'll note, of course, this is happening at the same time as we continue to work on the response to Hurricane Helene. Between those two events, we've got hundreds of DOT personnel on the ground. I participated in the briefing yesterday, briefing President Biden on our work alongside several cabinet agencies, and I was reflecting. It's the only time I can think of when we had to provide updates on what we were doing to deal with the last disaster and what we were doing for an upcoming disaster in the same meeting. That just tells you how much the U.S. is being hit all at once by this. But extraordinary people are showing extraordinary teamwork and resilience from the responders and the response personnel to ordinary people impacted by these storms. And that's what we're really counting on, that teamwork, that focus, and a lot of federal resources to make sure that that everybody gets through this.
Mr. Secretary, the head of FEMA responded to what you're giving voice to, just the sheer number and the gravity of the disasters hitting our country right now. Let me show that to you.
This is a high number. This is the most open disasters that I have seen with FEMA. This increase in the number of severe weather events we're seeing, as well as the complexity of many of these events because of the amount of damage that they're doing, is increasing the number of open disasters because the recovery is more complex and it takes longer to help reimburse these communities as they rebuild from the weather events that they have experienced.
Just talk about how vital that makes the quality of the information and people's ability to trust the information they're getting from the government and people there to help them.
Well, information is a basic need when you're dealing with a disaster. Just like you need clean water, you need power, you need transportation, you need information. And we're working to make sure people know the good, trusted sources of information to turn to. For example, when it comes to transportation, that includes the information available through a 511 system where the state pulls together the best information about what routes are available and open and safe, and what routes might be closed down or impassable. It is so important right now to turn to trusted sources of information, whether it's 511, whether it's FEMA, whether it's your local mayor and first responders, and not be listening to some guy on the internet, because it can make a life or death difference in the context of a disaster and in the aftermath of a disaster. People need to know what is available to them. So, for example, when somebody pushes a lie that the $750 that FEMA makes available for immediate needs like food, water, and diapers is all you're going to get, if somebody believes that, they might not get the resources that they actually deserve. So we're going to continue working hard to make sure that good information is reaching people. And by the way, I have to say, in my conversations that I've been having with senators, governors, mayors, you would never know which of them belong to the same political party as I do and which belong to the opposite political party. It's not about politics. It shouldn't be about politics. And we have to keep it that way.
Well, but to your point about some guy on the internet, there's a guy named Elon Musk who spread disinformation about Hurricane Helene that entered into the political ecosystem almost immediately, and certainly had as potential victims the people who were impacted by the storm. Talk about your efforts to combat the lies he was spreading about the airspace.
Well, I saw something go up on his feed that wasn't right. I responded directly, and pretty soon after that, we were talking. And I will say what we determined was, while it was certainly not the case that FAA was causing the problem that they were being accused of causing, it was the case that people delivering Starlink satellite equipment were running into issues, and FAA was able to help resolve that. So to me, it's a good example of the difference between human beings talking to each other in order to solve a problem versus everybody just kind of being behind their Twitter accounts saying things that aren't verified.
I feel like if we got rid of the things that we hide behind, we'd solve a whole lot of problems. Let me show you what the vice president had to say about this phenomenon in a phone interview with CNN.
I have spoken with local officials who have been struck, for example, by Hurricane Helene, and they are doing an extraordinary job in trying to combat the misinformation. And I'm talking about sheriffs, I'm talking about mayors, I'm talking about local officials. I don't even know their party affiliation, by the way, but leaders on the ground who know that it is not in the best interest of the people living in those areas to not know their rights, not to know what they're entitled to, and to be afraid of seeking help. It is dangerous. It is unconscionable, frankly, that anyone who would consider themselves a leader would mislead desperate people to the point that those desperate people would not receive the aid to which they are entitled. And that's why I call it dangerous. And we all know it's dangerous. And the gamesmanship has to stop. At some point, the politics have to end, especially in a moment of crisis and the crises that we've been seeing.
Do you feel confident that the administration can play whack-a-mole and successfully combat all the disinformation, or is the quantity and the ease with which it's disseminated another thing that's coming up in meetings behind closed doors as one of the things that needs a federal government response?
Well, it is an enormous challenge. And, you know, I was speaking to the FEMA administrator yesterday. She mentioned how there have always been issues in disasters. Maui, certainly this happened where there's misinformation or there's scams, but we've never seen anything like we have at this level. And it makes it all the more important, certainly for us to get good information out, for trusted sources to make themselves heard. The editorial role of journalistic organizations that have standards and that do fact checks is incredibly important at a time like this. But I'll also say there's a level of just responsibility, that if you are in a position of responsibility, if you're an elected official, if you're a major business leader, anybody with a platform needs to know that a lot depends on their telling the truth. And, you know, some of the most outlandish things we heard, I mean, we heard about somebody saying that a member of Congress saying that you know, this was the result of somebody controlling the weather. I think a lot of us have views about that member of Congress, but there are people out there who, because that's a member of Congress, will believe that sort of thing. And it's never been more important, especially when you have life and death decisions depending on people understanding the information that they're getting from real credible sources like mayors and police and fire departments and FEMA to have good information flow and to have trusted people. This is not the time to be listening to anybody who isn't credible.
And I know you're here in your official capacity, but how would you judge the character of someone who is indifferent to the ability of their own supporters or any Americans at this hour to make life and death decisions about evacuations or reimbursements or the help they need from the federal government?
All I can say is that the people whose lives depend on good information are Americans. They may be Democrats, Republicans, independents, doesn't matter. They're our fellow Americans. They deserve support. They deserve resources, which is exactly what our administration is mobilizing. We got more than 8,000 federal personnel on the ground, hundreds just from my department alone out there helping. That's what they're getting because that's what they deserve, help and support. And they deserve good information. They deserve the truth. And I don't care if you're in office or you're just a very visible person out there. Anybody who has a platform has a responsibility as well to use that platform to make sure people get good information and to tell the truth.
Congressman, what did you learn yesterday that has changed the way you are witnessing this hurricane tonight?
Well, thank you so much for having me on, Lawrence. And I'm here in Orlando. We're a few hours away from getting the really serious part of the storm. We've had rain and wind gusts up to 60 miles per hour so far. Being on that plane a few days ago was a very enlightening and educational experience, and a very intense experience. You know, my entire life growing up in the state of Florida, I've gotten used to hurricanes. I've gotten used to waking up, looking at the news, seeing the prediction of where to go, seeing all these models, but not fully understanding where this information comes from. And even though we have great technology now, there are still data points that have to be collected within the hurricane. And for people who don't know, NOAA, which is the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, has an amazing, heroic team that they call the Hurricane Hunters. And these folks are pilots, technicians, engineers, scientists, and meteorologists. And they fly into these storms, flights going anywhere between 8 and 12 hours. And they drop beacons within the storm, drop different things within it to collect data about the pressure, the size of the waves, and a bunch of different things. They send this data to the National Hurricane Center, and that is how we get all the information that we get about these storms. So this data literally saves lives. And I have to mention that there are people in Congress who have voted against funds for this important administration. And not just that, but Project 2025 wants to get rid of NOAA. And so it would literally cause us to not be able to save more lives. And so either way, it was incredibly intense experience. There were times where we free fell thousands of feet because of the way that they fly the plane within the hurricane. But it was an honor to be there. I learned so much about how important the work NOAA does is and how important the hurricane hunters are.
I just want to go back over that point about Project 2025 wanting to abolish NOAA, along with abolish the Department of Education. Abolish is a word that appears frequently in that document, but they want to abolish the scientific collection of data by the federal government that has been able to warn people in Florida how to save their lives and how much time they have to save their lives. They just want to eliminate that information system.
Yes, and this whole thing of Project 2025 and wanting to get rid of NOAA while at the same time wanting to get rid of the mention of climate change and the climate crisis as well shows that not only do they want to deny the issue, but they want to deny us the means and solutions to deal with the issue. And we see this happen all the time. You know, I'm on the House Oversight Committee. I have my colleagues on the other side of the aisle who constantly want to badger and talk about a lot of our agencies and departments. They're not doing their job. They're horrible. They're bureaucrats, this and that. And then at the same time, vote against budget increases to ensuring these agencies have the resources that they need. It's complete hypocrisy, and is what's going on here in Florida. And the thing about it is this data saves lives. There are people who have already died because of this hurricane today, and we're going to have more discussions over the coming days and weeks about how these two hurricanes that seemingly came out of nowhere are here because of the climate crisis and because it's here. But, you know, I'll tell you, Lawrence, when I was driving back from that Hurricane Hunters mission, I was on I-4 leaving kind of the Tampa area, coming back to Orlando, and I broke down being in the car because I'm in stop-and-go traffic. I'm looking to my left and right, and all you see is all these cars full of families, seniors, people, and you look at their face, they've packed up their entire livelihood, and they are scared. And this is becoming more and more of a normal occurrence for Floridians. And so when we talk about the impacts of climate change, of course, it's human lives, it's a death toll, but it's also people being displaced and people having to leave their homes time and time again. It's really sad. We've been focusing on making sure people are prepared here in Central Florida. We were at the emergency operations centers earlier today. I met with lunch workers who serve lunch to kids at school who are staying overnight in shelters to feed the people in the shelters 3 meals a day while we get through this storm. So if I know one thing is for sure, it's that here in Central Florida and across this state, we're going to help each other get through this. We're going to clean up, and then we're going to continue to have these conversations on how we need to make sure we prevent these kind of events happening again. I mean, we're having too many once-in-a-100-year storms over just the last 5 years.
In all of your conversations with the people living in the path of this hurricane, have you found people who believe Republican Marjorie Taylor Greene's statement that, I guess, President Biden controls the weather?
I haven't just yet, but what I have had is I've had people come up to me and ask questions about some of the misinformation they've seen out there. We saw former President Donald Trump talking about the $750 number without talking about the fact that there are different buckets that people can apply to get direct assistance from FEMA. One of the buckets is an immediate cash send out to help people with things they might have lost, where they need food, baby formula, stuff like that, which $750 can go a long way with that. There's another bucket of funds where people can help get money to help recover their home. So there's a lot of misinformation out there. And the problem here, and President Biden brought this up, is that when that misinformation goes into the public and people believe it, it means they don't believe or have any kind of faith in their government. And when they don't have faith in FEMA, it means they won't come to these organizations to get the help they need, which means that there are people out there who will need help who won't seek help because they've been lied to. And so what everyone should know is President Biden and Vice President Harris signed and authorized a pre-landfall emergency declaration for FEMA for this hurricane hitting now. FEMA and the federal government has resources up and down the state, working closely with the state and municipal governments, and we are working together to handle this thing. And the last thing we need are politicians trying to make political points and score political points out of this horrible tragedy. Right now, it doesn't matter if you're Democrat or Republican, we have to come together to save lives and keep people safe, especially people in our most vulnerable communities.
Unfortunately, a lot of the victims in the path of this hurricane right now cannot hear you say that. They don't have access to television right now for obvious reasons. Their phone batteries might be dying, and they might not be able to have internet access over the course of this. And so in situations like this, word of mouth actually becomes more important than it normally is. And Donald Trump has been poisoning, and Marjorie Taylor Greene have been poisoning the word of mouth, or trying to anyway. How much is that getting in the way of helping people?
It gets in the way. It really does get in the way, because what it does is it erodes faith. When I come to a mic and I say something, when our county mayor comes to a mic and says something, when someone from FEMA comes to a mic and says something, we need folks who are watching and who get this information to help us disseminate it so our neighbors understand. Something we always say here in Florida is, like, communities, we have to take care of each other. Neighbors have to take care of neighbors. I'm here at my parents' house right now, getting through the storm with them. It's going to hit here in Orlando in just a couple hours. We haven't gotten the worst of it yet. But when I got here to the house, my dad was out talking with neighbors, talking to each other, taking care of each other. And the problem is, when people start believing this and misinformation, they could be spreading lies. And again, if those lies get spread, people might not reach out to get the help that they need and the help that they deserve. And so, again, it is dangerous. It can cost us human lives when politicians, especially people with large platforms, spread mis and disinformation just to try to get ahead, just to try to get political points. It's a damn shame, and it's going to cost lives. And so we need people to focus on the truth. We cannot play politics with these hurricanes or these storms. We need to focus on saving people, helping people, and making sure we get on the other end of this.
Florida Congressman Maxwell Frost, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me on.
Thank you.
Far-right kooks and conspiracy theories of all sorts have been part of our political landscape for a very long time now. But they're more powerful than they've ever been in my lifetime. They're on social media, they're on Fox, some now hold elected office, even at the very top. Now, whether they do it out of cynicism or self-delusion, or like they've just got brainworms, they're all happy to promote outrageous disinformation about the libs and the globalists and immigrants and lots of other people who can't defend themselves. But then, every once in a while, their ceaseless lies present a practical problem to the Republican political establishment they serve. There was a moment that I think exemplified this back in November of 2020. After Joe Biden won and Donald Trump started spinning lies about a rigged result, there was still, remember, a pair of critical Senate runoff elections in Georgia, which would determine party control of the Senate. And Ronna Romney McDaniel, the RNC chairwoman at the time, struggled to convince Georgia Republicans to vote because they falsely believed their votes wouldn't be counted.
Machines are switching the votes, and we go there in crazy numbers, and they should have won, but then it's still.
Yeah, we have to. We didn't see that in the audit, so we've got to just that evidence I haven't seen. So we'll wait and see on that.
How are we going to give money and work when it's already decided?
It's not decided. This is the key.
No.
It's not decided. If you lose your faith and you don't vote, and people walk away. That will decide it.
Oh, really? Oh, now you don't like that disinformation, Ronna Romney McDaniel. Now you're standing up to tell them, no, it's not decided. It's not rigged. Now it's time to tell the truth that there will be bad consequences. Republicans lost both those elections, by the way. And so now here we are watching Hurricane Milton hitting Florida while still dealing with the aftermath of Hurricane Helene in the southeast. And I keep thinking of that Ronna Romney McDaniel clip because you've got government officials of both parties and apolitical civil servants struggling to combat the rampant misinformation that far-right politicians, pundits, and influencers are spreading about the storms and disaster response. From Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene posting repeatedly about they can control the weather, to Elon Musk, the diehard Trump-supporting owner of the website, formerly known as Twitter, using his site and his personal account to spread lies that officials say are hampering recovery efforts. Listen to some of the lies that Congressman Chuck Edwards decided he needed to rebut. To be clear, he's a Republican whose district covers some of the parts of North Carolina that were worst hit by Helene. He felt the need to tell his own constituents that no, Hurricane Helene was not geoengineered by the government to seize and access lithium deposits in Chimney Rock, adding, quote, nobody can control the weather. He also stressed that FEMA has not diverted disaster response funding to the border or foreign aid. More on that particular lie in a moment. Also stating that no, FEMA is not going to run out of money and that FEMA cannot seize your property or land. That's a conservative Republican congressman trying to save his constituents from disinformation spreading primarily among Republicans and conservatives on social media. He's not alone. When social accounts started spreading a false rumor that FEMA was hiring private security contractors in Florida to keep evacuees away from their homes, well, it was debunked online by Christina Pushaw, a staffer for Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, saying spreading lies like this could have serious consequences. If people in an evacuation zone see this and decide not to evacuate, despite warnings from state and local emergency management, they are unnecessarily putting their own lives and lives of first responders at grave risk. If Pushaw's name sounds familiar, it's because she has spent much of her career spreading anti-Semitic, anti-gay, anti-media conspiracy theories and fake news. She helped popularize the term groomers, a disgusting term, to condemn anyone critical of Florida's Don't Say Gay law. Now, imagine how bad the misinformation has to be for Christina to Pushaw to say enough is enough, you're endangering people's lives. Same can be said for Florida Senator Marco Rubio, who just last week, as we quoted on the show, was telling his social media followers, you can't trust the Biden White House and Bureau of Labor Statistics on jobs numbers. Another fake jobs report out from Biden-Harris government today. All the fake numbers in the world aren't going to fool people. But this week, Rubio was on Twitter telling his followers the path of Hurricane Milton mirrored what federal weather officials told him was a worst-case scenario. You see, now he needs his constituents to trust federal civil servants and follow their guidelines to survive the storm, just days after he told them that the same federal civil servants lie. See the problem here, right? And of course, the ultimate example of this is the big lie circulating about FEMA.
Kamala spent all her FEMA money, billions of dollars, on housing for illegal migrants.
Housing assistance under FEMA, almost any reasonable person would think would be available for Americans who are displaced from their houses in a time of disaster, but that has been used on illegal immigrants.
How can we afford to give billions of dollars to illegal immigrants in this country, but we've got to go back to the well to provide disaster relief for our own citizens? That's a disgrace.
Look, they can't even take care of people in North Carolina from a hurricane because they're too busy spending our taxpayer dollars taking care of illegal aliens.
This is the Biden-Harris administration caught red-handed dedicating a massive amount of money that was supposed to be there for emergency relief for Americans in North Carolina, Georgia, and elsewhere to dispense to illegal immigrants, while hurricane-ravaged victims all over the country are left out to dry.
To be clear, it's not like one of these things where it's a matter of interpretation or a kernel of truth. It's an absolute lie. stone cold lie, started by Donald Trump, then spread by his running mate, his supporters on Capitol Hill, all the lackeys you saw there, Steve Scalise, the number 2 man in Congress, his supporters on Fox. The lie says that FEMA lacks the resources for disaster victims because it spent the cash on undocumented migrants. It is a lie that, as you just heard, was debunked by a Republican congressman from the affected area. So here are the facts. FEMA has enough funding in the short term to address immediate needs for both Hurricane Helene and Hurricane Milton. And there is no funding connection between shelter for migrants and funding for disaster relief. There is no intermingling of funds between these two programs. That's not me saying it. It's the Republicans in charge of the House Appropriations Committee. In a fact sheet they shared yesterday with Chad Pergam, the congressional reporter for Fox, because they felt the urgent need to push back on a lie that is being spread by Fox News and by Donald Trump. A lie started by their candidate for President Donald Trump and amplified, as you've seen, by his campaign surrogates. Passed along on the social media site owned by the billionaire funding one of his super PACs. Republicans who suddenly see a conflict between the welfare of their constituents and the toxic effect of their party's propaganda, and also who don't want to fly back to Washington for an emergency session to fund FEMA when FEMA has money, now struggling to explain to their audiences that, well, up is up and down is down and water is wet and 2 + 2 = 4. And you could laugh at it when their disinformation was mainly just costing them votes in winnable elections like Georgia. But now it could cost lives in a massive, complex disaster recovery. It is enraging that it took a crisis of these proportions to convince politicians who have politicized everything that some government functions need to be above politics.
With us now is Ken Welch, mayor of St. Petersburg, Florida, which is about 45 miles north of where Hurricane Milton came ashore tonight. Mayor Welch, thank you for being here. I know this is a very, very busy, hectic, chaotic time for you. We really appreciate your time. What can you tell us about what you're seeing in St. Pete?
Well, you know, Alex, we were blessed that the storm didn't hit 50 miles north of where it did. We were looking at, 15 feet of storm surge, catastrophic winds, and looking down the barrel of that gun for 24 hours kind of wears the community down. We're not out of that yet. We still have really high winds. And of course, we are coming off of just 2 weeks ago, Hurricane Helene, and still trying to recover from that. But I think this storm opened a lot of eyes. We had much better response from our community, and we asked about 500,000 people in St. Pete and Pinellas County to evacuate, and we think overall they were very responsive to that. And this is just an example of our new normal as the storms are becoming more powerful, they're moving more quickly, and really testing our infrastructure.
Yeah, can we talk about that just because of the 1-2 punch between Helene and Milton? And granted, you're not in the direct, path of the storm right now, but you're quite close to it. And you're dealing, as you said, with managing the cleanup from the last very, very recent monster storm. What is your expectation about how long it's going to take to get things back and up and running fully after these two storms? Or do you even have an estimate at this point?
We don't. We know just from a debris standpoint, just from Helene, we were looking at months of debris pickup. And one of the problems that we obviously ran into is trying to compress 6 months of debris collection into just a few days before Hurricane Milton hit us. We've also got infrastructure needs. And, we believe in climate science, and we've been investing in our CIP for our infrastructure for years. But the pace of change that we're seeing and the strength of these storms and the impact is really outweighing our capital investment. And so we've got to relook at, everything from our sewer plants to wastewater to seawalls. All those things have to be improved at a more rapid pace because the change is coming that much more quickly than we thought it would.
Yeah, and this might be premature given, of course, that we're still grappling with this, but do you think that these two storms are an inflection point in terms of how the state thinks about the climate crisis and how it manages its mitigation?
Yeah, I think everyone sees the impact that these storms are making to our economy. We have to rebuild in a resilient way, in a way that makes sense given our new realities. We focused on mitigation, not contributing to the problem of carbon emissions and sea level rise, but now we've got to focus more on adaptation and do that in everything we do in terms of our capital improvement. That needs to happen, and I'm seeing across the board that folks understand the need to change the way we look at our environment and how we build in the state of Florida.
Are you talking to other mayors? I would assume, because you guys are all dealing regionally with the same crisis here, the hurricane that's coming through the area. Do you have a sense of what the needs are more broadly in the region where Milton is hitting?
I think mayors from all across the state of Florida are on the same page. I've heard from mayors from all across the state, from Tallahassee down to South Florida. We kind of call each other when we're in the target of these storms. And so at the local level, mayors, county commissioners understand the investments we need to make, given the realities of these storms and the impact that they can have on our community. They're becoming more powerful, and they don't give us the time to react. One of the issues here is that Milton went from a tropical storm to one of the most powerful hurricanes we've ever seen in a matter of 24 hours. And so that's a new reality. I think local governments get that, and we're working well together. And hopefully the state and the federal government will continue to partner with us to make those investments.
St. Petersburg Mayor Ken Welch, it's great to hear from you. Thank you for taking time in this busy moment. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Alex. Have a good one.